It's Friday, the 30th of July, 2021. Welcome to Fear and Greed, the business podcast that sets you up for a successful day. I'm Sean Aylmer. Hundreds of thousands of job losses are forecast as New South Wales calls in the army to help enforce the Sydney lockdown. That's our main story. Also coming up in today's podcast, Macquarie Bank says it's building up a bank of tens of billions of dollars to go shopping. The share prices of the big three miners all hit new records. And second-hand car prices up 1/3 over the past year, with more to come. Then, stay listening for my chat about digital billboards and how they're changing shopping centres. But first, here's a brief look at markets. Wall Street rallied overnight with the Dow Jones Industrial Average and S&P 500 both hitting new highs. About 40% of companies have now reported June quarter earnings, and 90% have beaten market expectations. Ironically, slower than forecast economic growth data helped the market because it added to the argument that interest rates won't rise anytime soon. The world's biggest economy expanded at a 6.5% annual pace during the 3 months to the end of June, taking output back to pre-pandemic levels. European markets were also stronger, led by a 0.8% jump in London's FTSE and a 0.5% rise in the Stoxx Europe 600. The S&P ASX 200 rose 0.5% yesterday to close at 7,417 points. The tech stocks did best, as well as the big miners. Real estate stocks went backwards. Among the large caps, Afterpay, REA Group, Cochlear and ResMed were among the best performers. Oil prices were up overnight and are now back above $76 a barrel. Gold was also higher and is trading around $1,830 an ounce, and the Aussie dollar is worth a touch under 74 US cents. The COVID story in Sydney goes from bad to worse, with the state calling in the army to help enforce the lockdown, which yesterday was tightened for large swathes of the city. 239 cases were recorded in New South Wales yesterday, another record, including 120 mystery cases where the cause was, as yet, unknown. There was a record 88 people in the community for at least part of the time they were infectious, and more than half of the new infections were people under the age of 40. The numbers triggered a raft of much harsher restrictions for 8 local government areas in the city, with millions of residents now forced to wear masks outdoors and not travel more than 5 kilometres from home. The New South Wales Police Force has been given new powers to force businesses to close when they're not obeying health orders to shut, and last night they formally requested help from the Australian Defence Force as they scramble to enforce the new rules. South Australia yesterday recorded 2 new cases linked to an existing cluster, while there were 7 local cases in Victoria, with 6 linked and 1 in isolation, but there was also 1 mystery case. The lockdown in Sydney, which will run until at least the end of next month, has triggered estimates of up to 300,000 job losses in the city. Commonwealth Bank expects 1 in 10 people in Greater Sydney to lose their employment. It has also forced state and federal governments to rethink whether a goal of 0 cases was still practical. The National Cabinet meets today to consider a Doherty Institute report that will recommend vaccination rates that would allow society to reopen. Prime Minister Scott Morrison yesterday said if that rate was deemed too high, then economic factors would have to be taken into account. The good news in all this was that the vaccination rollout was accelerating, with more than 200,000 vaccines administered yesterday and 4 million for the month of July. Almost 2/3 of over 50s have had at least 1 jab. If you live in Sydney, times are exceedingly difficult. Not much anyone can do except obey the rules and get vaccinated as soon as possible. In a moment, the rest of the news you need to know this morning. In overseas news, Tokyo is facing a health crisis in the middle of the Olympic Games, with the number of daily COVID-19 cases doubling since the beginning of competition to record levels. The athletes haven't been spared, with the entire Australian track and field team in isolation for a period yesterday, after being deemed contacts with US pole vaulter Sam Kendricks, who tested positive for coronavirus. There were 24 cases reported yesterday within the Olympic community, taking the total since the start of the Games to 198, including 23 athletes. The United States is set to leave Afghanistan after spending $840 billion, yet the country remains poor, aid-dependent and conflict-affected, with any potential economic growth in the short term further limited by the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's the judgment of the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. American troops are due to leave the country in 6 weeks after nearly 20 years of occupation. And Facebook reported yesterday that it expected a significant deceleration in revenue growth for the rest of this year. The June quarter figures beat estimates thanks to higher advertising spend as consumers spent more time at home and surfed social media sites. The world's largest social network site earned $29 billion in revenue during the quarter. On to local news. Macquarie Group said it will reduce future dividend payments to keep enough money in the bank, estimated at tens of billions of dollars, to buy assets that come up for sale as the global economy recovers. Chief Executive Shamara Wickramanayaka said trading conditions for the 3 months to June were significantly up on a year earlier. She hoped the COVID vaccine would be rolled out by the end of the year to get things back to normal. But in the meantime, the bank was monitoring its provisions for bad loans in response to the current lockdowns in Greater Sydney. Macquarie has also been under fire about the poor performance of tech group Newey. Macquarie promoted the float late last year, convincing investors to buy into the IPO, but Newey's share price went from $8 to more than $11 in February, back to its close yesterday of just $2.52. It's down 69% since it floated, and some investors are angry about the sale process. Macquarie Chair Peter Warne yesterday said, after a review of the IPO, it was clear that no corners were cut in the float and normal processes were followed. Like Dick Smith a few years back, it's hard to understand how a company can float at a price recommended by advisors only to tumble quickly afterwards. Surely the advisors should have some inkling. Rio Tinto's share price hit a record $137.33 yesterday before finishing 1.5% higher after declaring a massive dividend in its financial results on Wednesday night. Professional investors like the miner because of the amount of cash it's spitting out thanks to high iron ore prices. However, they are wary that production levels in copper and iron ore may fall this year. The good news out of Rio helped the other big iron ore miners yesterday, and all three were trading at record levels. BHP closed up 1.6% and Fortescue Metals was 1.9% higher after it reported that despite poor weather, total shipments of ore last financial year was a record. Fortescue also indicated it would pay a bigger than expected dividend, with analysts speculating it could double last year's payout. The Victorian government will force landlords to defer or forgive rent for struggling smaller retailers until the beginning of next year. As the state recovers from its latest lockdown, retailers with a turnover of less than $50 million, who have seen a 30% drop in sales from pre-COVID levels, must receive rent relief. Fair enough. But the people missing out are the big shopping centres. Now, mostly we don't feel sorry for them, but many of us hold those stocks as part of our superannuation funds. Not all buy now, pay later stocks are having a good time at the moment. The share prices of Splitit and OpenPay are both trading near 52-week lows. While revenue and customer numbers are climbing, some members of the sector are still making losses. But the potential for regulatory intervention, plus a bunch of new players in the payment systems markets on top, and the honeymoon is well and truly over for the buy now, pay later operators. Market leader Afterpay is having a better time, up 3% yesterday and nearly 50% over the year, and Zipco jumped 5.6% yesterday and is 13% higher than a year ago. Second-hand car prices have jumped around 34% over the past year, yes, risen, not fallen, and will continue to remain elevated until well into next year. A lack of new car supply due to a shortage of semiconductor chips is pushing the price of used cars higher, according to Moody's. It's helped the share price performances of listed dealers AP Eagers, Peter Warren Automotive, and Auto Sports Group. Qantas will join an international travel pass system that will include passengers' COVID-19 status or recent negative test. The scheme, organised under the auspices of the International Air Transport Association, will be used when international travel resumes. Passengers will have their health checks matched against flights. It will effectively be a digital COVID passport. Financial services software group Iris has knocked back a bid from private equity group EGT and said it would buy back $100 million worth of shares and double net profit after tax within the next 4 years. The $2.8 billion group's share price jumped almost 14% yesterday after the announcement. While the bid's been rejected, it's nice to get the offer, and it's always possible that buyers will come back. Unibail Rodamco Westfield is a property trust housing many of the offshore former Westfield assets. Its share price fell yesterday after net income for the first half of the year dropped 26%, thanks to COVID-related disruptions. However, the group said it had seen a recovery in foot traffic and sales since the latest reopening in Europe. Australian Pharmaceutical Industries has rejected an $867 million offer from Wesfarmers, saying the bid undervalued the company. The timing of the offer was opportunistic, given the impact COVID-19 had on the wholesale and retail business, API's board said. Investors weren't perturbed by the rejection, and the group's share price jumped nearly 2% to $1.44 a share yesterday. Now that's above the bid price and somewhat unusual, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, there's a higher bid in the offing. Oyster producer East 33, a friend of Fear and Greed, finally listed on the ASX yesterday, having pulled the float last year on the back of challenging market conditions and increased geopolitical tension. The rock oyster farmer's share price rose nearly 18% on opening, which is a pretty decent start. And finally, the Olympics. Jess Fox, three-time Australian Olympian who has come so close but never quite got the cigar, finally won gold yesterday in the canoe slalom final. Great paddler, good person, and deserved winner. Up next is our daily interview. My guest today is Ben Walker, the founder and CEO of Shopper. Shopper is a relatively new company with spectacular growth, and they're behind many of the digital billboards inside shopping centres and the like. They're changing the way the out-of-home industry operates, and it all comes down to technology and data, of course. That's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. It's Friday, the 30th of July, 2021. That's one day before the end of July, which has been a very dry month for me. I'm looking forward to Sunday, the 1st of August. I'm Sean Aylmer, and that was Fear and Greed. Enjoy your day.